2,000 feet down in water colder than a winter morning, a bug the size of a house cat crawls across the ocean floor. It looks like it walks straight out of a nightmare, but it is real and it is hungry. Down here, the normal rules break. A creature that should fit in your palm grows to the size of a coffee table. A worm with no mouth and no stomach still finds a way to eat. A squid grows eyes as big as soccer balls, just to catch a single photon of light in the pitch black. We are diving into the world of deep sea giants. A scavenger built like an armored tank. A shark older than your great great grandparents. A squid so massive it took scientists 100 years just to film it alive. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive, hit subscribe, it helps this channel grow. The deep ocean does not follow the rules of the surface. Get ready. We are going down. On land, size follows a simple pattern. Small animals live fast. Big animals are rare, and they take work to make. A mouse lives 2 years. An elephant lives 70. That pattern feels like a law of nature, something you could bet your life on. Then you drop below 2,000 feet and the bed falls apart. Down there, a bug-like creature the size of a house cat crawls across the mud. A worm with no mouth grows longer than a school bus. A squid grows eyes the size of soccer balls. None of this fits the pattern from the surface. Something in the deep ocean rewrites the rules of growth, and scientists have spent over a century trying to explain why. The pattern shows up again and again, in animal after animal, ocean after ocean. Biologists gave it a name, deep sea gigantism. It is not one animal doing something strange. It is dozens of unrelated species, some as different as a crab and a worm, all growing to sizes that should not make sense. Picture the Pacific Ocean the way a satellite sees it, a sheet of blue stretching farther than the eye can follow. Now picture sinking through that blue, past the last sunlight, past the last hint of warmth, down to where the water sits just above freezing and the pressure could crush a car like a soda can. That is where these giants live. That is where the rules change. Here is the first clue. The deep ocean is not one habitat. It is stacked like a parking garage, floor after floor, each one colder, darker, and more crushing than the last. The sunlit floor near the top holds fish you would recognize. Go down far enough and you leave light behind completely. This is the realm the Greenland shark, the giant squid, and the giant isopod call home. Scientists studying this pattern are not chasing one single answer. They are chasing several, because no one theory explains every giant. Cold water might slow an animal's engine down, letting its cells grow larger before it ever needs to stop. The extra oxygen dissolved in cold water might remove a limit that keeps shallow animals small. Even the near weightlessness of deep water, where gravity barely matters, might let bodies grow past what land could ever support. Each theory holds a piece of the puzzle. None of them holds all of it. That gap, the space between what scientists know and what they still cannot explain, is exactly why this mystery keeps pulling in new research decades after it was first noticed. The first stop on this journey is not the strangest creature in the deep, it is the most familiar one. Dragged down into a nightmare version of itself, you have probably seen its tiny cousin roll into a ball under a rock in your backyard. Multiply that bug by roughly 50 times, and you get an animal that looks like it escaped a monster movie. Something in the deep sea took an ordinary garden pest and built a giant out of it. To understand how, we start at the bottom of the ocean floor, where that giant is about to start crawling straight into frame. A shape moves across the ocean floor, slow and armored, like a tank rolling through mud. It has 14 legs. It has a shell built from overlapping plates, stacked like a knight's armor. If you flipped over a rock in your backyard and found a bug curled into a tiny gray ball, you have already met its cousin. This is that same bug, scaled up to the size of a house cat. Its name is Gigantism gigantis, the giant isopod. It can stretch past 30 inches long and weigh close to 4 pounds, roughly the weight of a bowling pin. Compare that to its backyard relative, the pillbug, which barely reaches the length of your fingernail. That is not a small jump. That is an animal growing dozens of times larger than its closest relatives, for reasons scientists are still working to fully explain. The giant isopod lives on the seafloor, anywhere from 500 to 7,000 feet down. At that depth, sunlight is a rumor. The water sits close to freezing. Most animals would starve, freeze, or simply give up. The giant isopod does none of those things. It thrives. Part of the secret is patience. Food does not arrive on a schedule down here. There's no cafeteria line, no regular meal times. Instead, a whale carcass might sink to the bottom once every few years. An enormous, unpredictable jackpot of food. When that happens, giant isopods swarm it like sharks at a feeding frenzy, gorging until their bodies swell almost to bursting. Then comes the waiting. A giant isopod can go without eating for over a year. Scientists studying one in captivity found it survived more than 5 years between meals. Imagine skipping lunch for half a decade and walking away fine. That is not a metaphor. That is closer to the actual lifestyle. How does an animal pull that off? Slow metabolism is the answer, and it connects directly to the freezing water around it. Cold temperatures put the brakes on every chemical process inside an animal's body. Heartbeat slow, digestion slows, energy use drops to a fraction of what a warm water creature would burn. The giant isopod is not lazy. It is running on the deep sea equivalent of battery saver mode, built to survive famine as a way of life. When threatened, the giant isopod has one more trick borrowed straight from its garden-dwelling cousin. It curls into a tight ball, tucking its soft underside away and leaving only its armored shell exposed to any predator that comes calling. A shark can bite down on that shell and get nothing but a mouthful of hard plate for its trouble. Its eyes tell their own story about life in total darkness. Each eye holds over 4,000 tiny lenses, built to catch the faintest scrap of light that filters down from the surface, or the flicker of all bioluminescence drifting past in the black. Down here, sight is not about color or detail. It is about noticing movement before something with teeth notices you first. The giant isopod raises the first real question of this journey. Why would an animal built for scarcity, an animal that survives on almost nothing, grow larger instead of smaller? On land, tight resources usually shrink a species down over generations. In the deep sea, the opposite seems to happen, and the giant isopod is not the only animal doing it. Farther down in the crushing dark past 2,000 feet, an entire wave of oversized creatures is waiting, and their existence bends the rules of survival even further. Most predators live by the chase. A shark sprints down a fish. A lion sprints down a gazelle. Speed decides who eats and who starves. The giant isopod skips that entire game. It rarely chases anything at all, and that single choice may be part of the secret behind its size. Picture the ocean floor as a crime scene that never gets cleaned up. A dead fish drifts down from above. A jellyfish dies and sinks. Every so often something massive falls. A whale carcass the size of a school bus, dropping onto the seafloor like a delivery truck. Scientists call this marine snow when it is small, drifting constantly downward, and a foodfall when it is large and sudden. Either way, the giant isopod does not hunt it. It waits for it. This strategy works because giant isopods do not burn energy the way active hunters do. A cheetah needs a fast metabolism to power those explosive sprints, and that same fast metabolism demands a steady stream of food to keep running. The giant isopod runs the opposite system. Its slow, cold-adapted metabolism means it can sit motionless for weeks, buried halfway into the sediment, waiting for the next meal to arrive on its own. When a foodfall finally lands, the isopod does not eat like a picky guest. It eats like it might never see food again, because down here, that might be true. Scientists have watched giant isopods gorge so aggressively that their exoskeletons stretch to the point of nearly splitting open. One meal might carry an isopod through the next full year of its life. This changes the entire math of survival. On land or in shallow water, a small body is often an advantage. Small animals need less food to stay alive so they can survive on scraps. In the crushing scarcity of the deep sea, that logic flips. A larger body can store more fat, more energy reserves, more of a buffer against the long stretches when nothing falls from above. Size stops being a burden and becomes a survival tool, like a camel's hump built for a desert with no gas stations. There's a second advantage hiding inside that armored shell. Being big also means being hard to kill. A predator that spends energy attacking a giant isopod and getting nothing but a mouthful of plated shell has wasted a meal it could not afford to waste. In a world where every calorie counts, that failed attack might be the difference between a predator's next successful hunt and its own slow starvation. Piece these clues together and a picture starts to form. Cold water slows the isopod's engine. Slow engines need less fuel. Less fuel means it can survive on food that arrives once a year instead of once a day. And a bigger body holds more reserves to bridge that gap. Every part of the giant isopod's biology points toward the same outcome: survival by patience, not by speed. But patience alone cannot explain everything. A slow metabolism explains why the giant isopod can go without food. It does not fully explain why its body grew so much larger than its shallow water relatives in the first place. For that piece of the puzzle, we have to look at something even more basic than food. We have to look at the crushing weight of the ocean itself and ask why it does not flatten these giants like a car under a hydraulic press. Sink 2,000 feet into the ocean and the pressure climbs to levels that would flatten a submarine hull if it were built wrong by even a few inches of steel. At the deepest trenches on Earth, pressure reaches over 16,000 pounds per square inch, roughly the weight of 50 jumbo jets stacked on a single square foot. A human dropped down there without protection would be crushed in an instant. So how does an animal like the giant isopod survive at those depths, let alone grow larger there than anywhere else on the planet? The answer starts with a simple fact about water. Water does not compress. Squeeze it as hard as you want and it barely changes shape. Now think about what a giant isopod, or a giant squid, or almost any deep-sea animal is mostly made of. Water. Their bodies are built from the same nearly incompressible substance surrounding them on every side. Picture a plastic water bottle, empty, sealed shut, and dropped into a swimming pool. The water pressure crushes it instantly, folding the empty air pockets flat. Now picture that same bottle, completely filled with water, with no air trapped inside at all. Drop it to the bottom of the pool, and it survives untouched. The pressure has nothing to squeeze, because there is no empty space left to collapse. That is close to the situation for a giant isopod. Its body holds almost no compressible air pockets, no hollow lungs like ours filled with gas. Pressure pushes in from every direction equally, and the isopod's own internal fluid pressure pushes back out just as hard. The forces cancel out. What would crush a human or crush a fish with an air-filled swim bladder passes straight through the isopod's flesh with almost no effect at all. This single fact rewrites survival math for the entire deep sea. Once pressure stops being a limiting factor, an enormous obstacle to growing large simply disappears. On land, gravity and structural strength put a hard ceiling on how big an animal's body can get before its own skeleton fails under its weight. In deep water, that ceiling barely exists. Pressure is not the enemy anymore. It becomes almost a non-issue, freeing up space for evolution to experiment with size in ways land could never allow. Here's where the story turns into something bigger than one crab-like scavenger. If crushing pressure is not actually crushing these animals, then pressure alone cannot explain why they grow enormous. Something else must be doing the pushing, some other force nudging evolution toward giant bodies instead of small ones. Scientists needed another explanation, and they found one in the very thing that makes the deep ocean feel like outer space: the absence of gravity's usual grip. Stand on land and gravity never lets up. It pulls down on every bone, every muscle, every ounce of tissue, all day, every day. That constant pull is exactly why land animals cannot grow past a certain size. A blue whale on a beach would collapse under its own weight within hours, its organs crushed by a force the ocean never lets it feel. That single fact changes everything about what is possible in deep water. Water pushes back against gravity in a way air never can. Scientists call this buoyancy, and it works like an invisible hand supporting an animal's entire body from every direction at once. A whale suspended in the ocean is not fighting gravity the way an elephant fights it on land. The water is holding it up, canceling out most of that downward pull before it ever reaches the whale's muscles and bones. Picture the difference between carrying a heavy backpack on dry land and carrying that same backpack while swimming in a pool. On land, your shoulders feel every pound. In the pool, the weight nearly disappears. Multiply that feeling by an entire ocean, and you start to understand why deep-sea animals can grow to sizes that would be physically impossible anywhere on solid ground. This is the piece that connects directly back to the giant isopod's armored body. On land, an exoskeleton that thick and that heavy would be a serious liability. Extra weight dragging against every step. In water, that same armor costs almost nothing. Buoyancy carries the load instead of muscle and bone, so evolution is free to build thick armor, oversized limbs, and massive bodies without paying the usual structural price. Reach even deeper into the ocean, and this cheat code only gets stronger. The Japanese spider crab, a creature we will meet a few stops ahead, spans nearly 40 feet from claw tip to claw tip while living at depths beyond 6,000 feet. No land animal could ever grow legs that long and still walk. Gravity would snap them instantly. In water, buoyancy makes the entire structure possible, turning an idea that sounds like science fiction into an animal that actually crawls across the seafloor today. Buoyancy alone is not the entire answer, though. It explains how a giant body becomes physically possible. It does not fully explain why evolution would push a species toward becoming giant in the first place, when growing large also means growing hungry, and food down here is nowhere close to guaranteed. Something else has to be tipping the scale. Some additional force nudging these animals toward bigger and bigger bodies generation after generation. That force turns out to be temperature itself, and it comes with a rule so consistent that scientists gave it a name over a century ago, long before anyone had ever filmed a living giant squid. In the 1800s, a German biologist named Carl Bergmann noticed something strange while studying warm-blooded animals across different climates. Polar bears, built for the Arctic, dwarf their tropical bear relatives. Emperor penguins, living through brutal Antarctic winters, grew far larger than penguin species near the equator. Bergman wrote down a pattern that would later carry his name. Animals in colder regions tend to grow larger than close relatives living in warmer places. For over a century, scientists mostly applied Bergman's rule to animals like bears and penguins, creatures that generate their own body heat. Then researchers started noticing the same pattern showing up in the deep ocean, among animals that do not generate heat internally at all. The giant isopod, the colossal squid, crustaceans and mollusks scattered across the coldest, deepest water on the planet, all of them oversized, all of them living in near freezing conditions. Why would cold temperature push a body toward growing larger in the first place? The answer starts at the smallest possible scale, inside individual cells. Cold slows down chemical reactions. This is basic chemistry. The same reason food lasts longer in a refrigerator than on a kitchen counter. Inside a living animal, cold water appears to allow individual cells to grow larger before they need to divide. Scientists studying the deep ocean have found that colder water, crustaceans often have noticeably bigger cells than their warm water relatives. String enough oversized cells together, and you get an oversized body built naturally out of larger, if fewer, building blocks. Picture two identical brick walls built to the exact same height. One wall uses small bricks, so it needs a huge number of them stacked together. The other wall uses oversized bricks, so it reaches the same height using far fewer pieces. Now imagine those oversized bricks do not stop at matching the first wall. They keep going, piling higher and higher because each individual brick is doing more work. That is roughly what happens inside a giant isopod compared to a common garden. Pill bug. Bigger cellular bricks stacked into a body that towers over its shallow water cousin. There's a second piece hiding inside this same cold water puzzle: longevity. Slower cell division does not just mean bigger cells, it often means a longer overall life. Slower biological processes typically mean an animal ages more gradually, giving its body more total time to keep growing before it ever reaches full maturity. A creature that spends decades growing instead of just a year or two has far more time to reach a genuinely enormous size. This is exactly where the giant isopod's 5-year fast and the Greenland shark's centuries-long lifespan waiting a few chapters ahead start to connect into the same underlying story. Cold does not just slow an animal down, it stretches out its entire timeline, growth included. Bergmann's rule offers a genuinely strong piece of this puzzle, but even Bergman himself would admit it cannot stand alone as the full answer. Bigger cells and longer lifespans explain part of the size story, but they do not fully explain the energy side of the equation. How does a massive body, one built from oversized cells and stretched across a longer life, manage to survive on so little available food? For that half of the puzzle, the scientists turn to a completely different rule, one built around efficiency rather than cell size. Slow down a body's chemistry, and something else changes along with cell size. The entire clock an animal runs on. This is the part of Bergmann's rule that turns a simple size pattern into a full explanation for why deep-sea giants can afford to exist at all. Think about how a candle burns. A thin, narrow candle burns fast, melting down within an hour or two. A thick, wide candle holding the same type of wax burns for a full day or longer. The thick candle is not made of anything special, it just has more material to burn through before it runs out, so the flame lasts longer using the exact same fuel. Cold water animals work in a similar way. Slower metabolism means their internal processes run at a reduced pace, the biological equivalent of a low, steady flame instead of a fast, roaring one. Aging itself appears to slow down alongside it. An animal that ages slowly does not rush to reach full adult size in a year or two. It keeps growing steadily across a much longer stretch of time, adding size year after year in a way that a fast-aging, warm water relative never gets the chance to do. The Greenland shark, one of the true giants still waiting a few chapters ahead in this story, pushes this idea to its most extreme edge. Scientists studying this species believe individuals can live for centuries, some potentially older than the founding of the United States. A body given that much time is a body given room to keep expanding, decade after decade, long after most animals would have already died of old age. Here's where the picture starts locking into place. Cold water slows metabolism. Slowed metabolism stretches lifespan. A stretched lifespan hands an animal decades, sometimes centuries, of extra time to keep adding size. None of these three pieces work alone. They build on each other, one leading directly into the next. Like a chain reaction that starts with something as simple as water temperature, this also helps explain something that might otherwise seem contradictory. Deep sea giants live in one of the most food scarce environments on the entire planet, and yet they are some of the largest animals alive. A fast growing animal needs fast, steady access to food to fuel that speed. A slow growing animal does not. It can add size gradually, patiently, across 100 years if needed, using only the scraps of food the deep ocean happens to provide along the way. Bergmann's rule, when you follow it all the way through, answers a question about the time. It explains why deep sea giants have so many extra years available to keep growing. It does not fully answer a second separate question. How do these animals afford to keep that oversized body running once they've built it on so little available fuel? Time alone does not pay the energy bill. For that half of the mystery, scientists turn to a completely different scientific rule, one built specifically around efficiency rather than growth. In 1932, a Swiss-American scientist named Max Kleiber sat down with data comparing the metabolisms of dozens of different animals. What he found reshaped how biologists think about body size for the next century. Kleber discovered that bigger animals do not burn energy in direct proportion to their size. A mouse and an elephant do not scale up in a simple, even line. Instead, large animals turn out to be dramatically more energy efficient, pound for pound, than smaller ones. A cat that weighs 100 times more than a mouse needs only around 30 times as many calories to survive, not 100 times as many. Somewhere in that jump from small body to large body, the animal gains a kind of hidden efficiency bonus. Picture two food trucks feeding a stadium crowd. One truck is tiny, so it needs to run back and forth constantly, burning fuel every single trip just to keep up with demand. The other truck is massive, capable of hauling 10 times the food in a single run. It burns more total fuel than the small truck, sure, but per item of food delivered, it is running far more efficiently. That second truck, the big one, is essentially Kleber's law in action. This efficiency exists because of a basic rule about geometry called the surface area to volume ratio. A small body has a huge amount of surface area compared to how much volume or mass sits inside it. That means it loses heat fast and needs to eat constantly just to replace the energy leaking out through its own skin. A large body flips that ratio. Its surface area is comparatively small next to its enormous internal volume, so it loses far less heat relative to its size and needs proportionally less food to stay warm and functioning. Now connect this directly back to the deep ocean. Cold water is exactly the kind of environment where losing body heat fast becomes a life-threatening problem. A small animal in freezing water is bleeding heat constantly, forced to eat non-stop just to break even. A large animal in that same freezing water loses heat far more slowly thanks to its favorable surface area to volume ratio, giving it a genuine survival edge in a place where meals might not show up again for months. This is precisely why the giant isopod can survive over a year without eating, while its tiny backyard cousin, the pill bug, needs food constantly just to stay alive. Their surface area to volume ratio sit worlds apart. The isopod's oversized body holds in heat and energy far more efficiently, turning size itself into a direct survival tool rather than a burden. Kleiber's law and Bergmann's rule now fit together as two halves of the same explanation. Bergmann's rule explains why cold water gives these animals more time and bigger cells to grow with in the first place. Kleiber's law explains why, once an animal reaches an enormous size, that size becomes a genuine efficiency advantage instead of a liability. Growing big is not fighting against the deep ocean's harsh conditions, it is working directly with them. But even these two rules combined leave one obvious gap. Efficient or not, every animal still needs oxygen to survive, and oxygen becomes scarce in a lot of deep water. So how does a giant body, one requiring far more total oxygen than a small one just to keep all that extra tissue alive, get enough air in an environment famous for having so little of it? The answer turns out to hide in the very same cold water that is already doing so much of the work. Fill a glass with warm soda and watch the bubbles race to the surface almost instantly. Fill a second glass with the same soda, ice cold, and the bubbles escape far more slowly, lingering inside the liquid instead of rushing out. That simple kitchen experiment reveals a basic law of chemistry. Cold liquid holds on to dissolved gas far better than warm liquid does. The exact same principle applies to oxygen dissolved in ocean water, and it may be one of the biggest missing pieces behind deep sea gigantism. Warm surface water, heated by the sun, actually holds less dissolved oxygen than the frigid water found miles below. That fact sounds backward at first, since most people assume the deep ocean must be starved of oxygen along with everything else. In reality, cold deep water in many regions carries a genuine oxygen advantage over the sun-warmed water sitting above it. This connects directly to a hard limit that governs the size of every animal alive today. A larger body contains more total cells, and every single one of those cells needs a steady oxygen supply just to survive. On land, insects run into this wall constantly. Their oxygen delivery system is fairly primitive, built from simple tubes rather than lungs, and that system can only carry oxygen so far into a growing body before it runs out of range. This single limitation is a major reason why insects stay small, no matter how much food might be available to them. Scientists refer to this broader idea as the oxygen temperature hypothesis. Picture an animal's oxygen supply as the plumbing system running through an entire office building. A small building gets by, fine with narrow pipes. Try to scale that exact same narrow plumbing up to a skyscraper, and water pressure collapses long before it reaches the top floors. The building needs fundamentally bigger pipes just to function at that larger size. Cold, oxygen-rich, deep water works like a genuine upgrade to an animal's plumbing, delivering enough oxygen to support a much larger body than sun-warmed shallow water ever could. This idea gained real scientific traction after researchers studied Antarctic sea spiders, alien-looking giants we will meet several chapters ahead. Scientists tested whether these oversized spiders struggled more than smaller ones when oxygen levels changed. Some of that research produced results that genuinely challenged the simplest version of the hypothesis, which is exactly why this remains one of the most actively debated pieces of the entire puzzle. Deep sea gigantism does not come with one single, tidy answer. It comes with several competing theories, each one holding up under some evidence and struggling under other evidence, and researchers are still working today to sort out how much weight each theory truly deserves. Layer the oxygen temperature hypothesis onto everything already covered, and a genuinely complete picture starts to take shape. Cold water grows bigger cells and slower aging buy more total time to grow. A larger body burns fuel more efficiently per pound. Now, cold water also happens to deliver the extra oxygen a larger body needs just to keep all that new tissue alive and functioning. 4 separate scientific ideas, each one reinforcing the others, all pointing toward the exact same outcome. There is still one major piece of this puzzle left completely unexplained though. Efficient metabolism and abundant oxygen only matter if there is actually food available to fuel that metabolism in the first place. And food in the deep sea is famously brutally scarce, so why would scarcity itself, the very thing that should shrink a species down over generations, end up pushing some of these animals toward becoming larger instead? That answer flips one of biology's most basic assumptions completely upside down. Common sense says scarcity should shrink a species. Less food available should mean smaller bodies, since smaller bodies need less fuel to survive. That logic holds up in plenty of places across the animal kingdom. In the crushing scarcity of the deep sea, though, the opposite pattern often plays out, and once you follow the reasoning, it starts to make a strange kind of sense. Imagine 2 search parties, both hunting for scattered supply drops across a landscape with no roads and no map. One team moves on foot, covering ground slowly and needing frequent rest stops along the way. The other team rides motorcycles, covering the same territory far faster and needing to stop for fuel far less often relative to the distance traveled. When resources are sitting close together and easy to find, the team on foot does just fine. When those same resources are scattered thin across a massive area, the motorcycle team has the clear advantage, because covering more ground efficiently becomes the actual key to survival. In the deep ocean, food resembles that second scenario almost perfectly. It is not spread evenly across the seafloor like grass in a meadow. It shows up unpredictably, and often in isolated, widely scattered patches. A dead fish here, a cluster of nutrients drifting down there. Finding that food demands genuine mobility and range. A larger body, it turns out, is frequently better built to search wide territory and then survive comfortably through the long, empty stretches between each discovery. This connects directly back to something covered a few chapters earlier. Bigger bodies store more energy reserves. Picture a hiker setting out on a 2-week trek through empty desert. One hiker carries a small day pack, the other carries a full expedition pack, loaded with extra food and water. The hiker with the day pack runs out of supplies fast and has to turn back early. The hiker with the bigger pack can keep pushing forward, searching farther, surviving longer between actual meals. A larger deep sea body works the same way, functioning as its own built-in expedition pack, storing enough reserves to survive the long, uncertain gaps between foodfalls. There is a second angle hidden inside the same idea, one connected to reproduction rather than daily survival. In genuinely scarce environments, some species delay reaching full sexual maturity, spending those extra years instead on continued physical growth. An organism that waits longer before reproducing effectively trades early offspring for a larger, tougher adult body, one built to survive whatever the deep ocean happens to throw at it over a much longer lifespan. Scientists studying deep sea gigantism increasingly believe no single theory explains every single giant species on its own. Food scarcity does not work alone, any more than cold temperature or extra oxygen work alone. These forces appear to stack directly on top of each other: cold water, extra oxygen, slower aging, scattered, unpredictable food. Each factor nudges evolution in the exact same direction, and when they combine, a house cat sized pill bug crawling across the ocean floor stops sounding impossible. It starts sounding almost inevitable. Now it is time to step away from theory completely and meet the animals actually living out these rules. Real creatures that push the boundaries of biology far beyond anything explored so far. The first candidate does not scavenge in the mud like the giant isopod. It reaches upward instead, a leg span wide enough to cover a school bus, and it has been quietly waiting for its moment in this story since the very beginning. Off the coast of Japan, in water reaching down past 2,000 feet, an animal unfolds itself across the seafloor with a leg span nearly 40 feet wide. That is longer than a school bus. That is wider than most living rooms. This is the Japanese spider crab, and it holds the title of the largest arthropod leg span on the entire planet. Picture the body first, because it is almost misleadingly small. The crab's actual shell, the central mass holding its organs, measures only around 15 inches across, roughly the size of a large pizza. Everything dramatic about this animal comes from its legs, thin, spindly limbs that stretch out from that modest central body like the arms of some enormous umbrella slowly opening. Those legs are not built for speed. A Japanese spider crab moves at a careful, deliberate crawl, picking its way across the seafloor one leg at a time. Speed is not the priority here. Reach is. Long legs let this crab cover far more ground while searching for food than a short-legged crab ever could, sweeping a huge radius of seafloor without needing to relocate its entire body constantly. This is buoyancy working exactly as described a few chapters back, pushed to one of its most extreme results anywhere in the ocean. On dry land, legs stretched to nearly 20 feet long on each side of the body would snap instantly under their own weight the moment the animal tried to take a single step. Gravity would win before the crab ever moved an inch. In water, buoyancy supports almost the entire weight of those long limbs, cancelling out gravity's pull and making a body plan that sounds like pure science fiction into something that actually crawls across the ocean floor today. Depth adds a second layer of explanation on top of buoyancy. The Japanese spider crab lives in genuinely cold water, and it can survive for decades, some individuals reportedly reaching past 100 years old. That lifespan connects directly back to Bergman's rule from several chapters ago. Cold water slows metabolism. Slower metabolism stretches out lifespan. A longer lifespan hands this crab many extra decades to keep adding growth, one mold at a time, long after a shallow water crab relative would have already died of old age. There's something almost unsettling about an animal this size, moving with total silence through complete darkness. No roar, no splash, nothing but the quiet click of legs finding footing on sediment that has not felt sunlight in millions of years. A creature spanning the length of a school bus exists down there right now, and almost nobody on the surface world ever thinks about it. The Japanese spider crab raises an obvious question that becomes more interesting the longer you sit with it. If this crab has been quietly holding a nearly 40-foot leg span for who knows how long, and if it lives at depth this extreme, how has it managed to stay so far outside the public spotlight? The next chapter explains exactly why an animal this enormous can remain almost completely invisible, hiding in plain sight for years at a time. An animal spanning nearly 40 feet across should be impossible to miss. Yet the Japanese spider crab spends most of its life completely unnoticed, and the reasons why reveal just how alien the deep ocean truly is compared to anywhere on the surface world. Start with the obvious barrier: depth. This crab lives past 2,000 feet down, in water so dark that human eyes register nothing but pure black. No sunlight reaches that far. No casual diver stumbles across it on a weekend trip. Spotting a Japanese spider crab in its natural habitat requires a submersible, a remotely operated vehicle, or years of patient, specialized deep sea research. Most of human history passed by without a single living person ever laying eyes on one down there. Camouflage adds a second layer of protection on top of raw depth. Despite its enormous size, the Japanese spider crab is not built to stand out. Its shell often gathers a thin coating of algae and small marine organisms over time, blending its silhouette into the surrounding rock and sediment. A shape that massive, sitting perfectly still against the cluttered seafloor, can be remarkably easy to miss, even when a camera happens to be pointed directly at it. Behavior plays its own quiet role as well. This crab does not move fast, and it does not move often. Long stretches of stillness, combined with that slow, deliberate crawl whenever it does move, mean it rarely draws attention the way a fast, darting animal naturally would. Picture trying to spot a statue standing motionless in a dim, cluttered room versus spotting a person sprinting straight across that same space. Stillness itself becomes its own form of camouflage. There's something genuinely strange about sitting with this idea for a moment. Somewhere off the coast of Japan, right now, animals with an almost 40-foot leg span are slowly walking across the ocean floor in complete darkness, and most of the 8 billion people living on the surface of this planet will go their entire lives without ever giving that fact a single thought. The deep ocean is not some distant alien world reachable only through science fiction. It sits directly beneath the same water where people surf, swim, and sail every single day, just a few thousand feet straight down. This pattern, size hiding successfully behind depth, camouflage, and stillness, is not unique to the spider crab. It repeats again and again throughout the deep ocean, and it helps explain why so many of Earth's largest animals went completely undiscovered by science until shockingly recent decades. The next giant in this story does not even bother hiding behind camouflage or stillness. It hides behind something even stranger. It does not eat food in any way a human would recognize as eating at all. Picture an animal that never eats a single bite of food in its entire life, and somehow still grows to be 7 feet long. That is the giant tube worm, one of the strangest survival stories the deep ocean has ever produced. Giant tube worms live clustered around hydrothermal vents, cracks in the ocean floor where scalding mineral-rich water blasts out from deep inside the earth. These vents sit miles below the surface, in total darkness, surrounded by water that can shift from near freezing to over 600 degrees within just a few feet of distance. It is one of the single most hostile environments found anywhere on the planet, and giant tube worms do not just survive there, they thrive there, forming dense colonies that stretch for yards across the seafloor. Here's where the story turns genuinely strange. As an adult, a giant tube worm has no mouth, it has no stomach, it has no digestive system in any form a human would recognize as one. It cannot eat food the way virtually every other animal on Earth does. Instead, this worm survives through a completely different biological strategy. Inside its body sits a specialized organ called a trophosome, essentially an internal farm packed with billions of bacteria living inside the worm's own tissue. The worm's feathery red plume, the part that extends out from its tube into open water, absorbs chemicals drifting out from the vent, mainly hydrogen sulfide, a compound that would poison most other animals almost instantly. The worm delivers those absorbed chemicals straight down to its internal bacteria. In exchange for a safe home and steady chemical supply, the bacteria produce the nutrients the worm needs to survive, essentially cooking its meals from the inside out. Picture keeping a garden growing entirely inside your own stomach and eating nothing at all yourself, living only off whatever that internal garden happens to produce for you. That is roughly the deal this worm has struck with its own bacteria, a genuine partnership where each side depends completely on the other just to stay alive. This arrangement helps solve one of the deep ocean's biggest survival puzzles. Hydrothermal vents sit far below where any sunlight can reach, so there are no plants down there and no traditional food chain to rely on. The giant tube worm sidesteps that entire problem by building its food supply out of raw chemistry instead, converting the vent's toxic output directly into fuel through its own living bacteria. Growth here moves at a genuinely startling pace. Some giant tube worms can grow several feet within just their first 2 years of life, making them among the fastest growing invertebrates found anywhere in the ocean. That speed connects directly back to the sheer abundance of chemical energy pouring non-stop out of the vent, a virtually unlimited fuel source for any animal that has figured out how to use it. There is something almost unsettling sitting underneath this entire survival strategy. an animal with no mouth, no stomach, and no traditional way of eating anything at all, thriving in some of the most violently hostile water on Earth, has effectively built its own living factory to make food appear out of raw poison. The next chapter goes even deeper into that chemistry, into exactly how an entire ecosystem manages to run without a single ray of sunlight anywhere inside. And nearly every food chain on Earth starts in the same place: sunlight. Plants capture that sunlight and convert it into energy through photosynthesis. Animals eat those plants. Other animals eat those animals. Trace almost any meal back far enough, and eventually you land on a plant soaking up rays from the sun. Hydrothermal vents break that rule completely. Down here, in permanent darkness where sunlight has never once reached, an entire ecosystem thrives using a different energy source altogether, raw chemistry blasting straight out of the Earth's interior. Picture a hydrothermal vent as an underwater volcano's exhaust pipe. Seawater seeps down into cracks in the ocean floor, gets superheated by magma sitting close beneath the crust, and then shoots back out loaded with dissolved minerals and chemicals, including large amounts of hydrogen sulfide, the same compound responsible for the smell of rotten eggs. To virtually every animal living near the surface, hydrogen sulfide in that concentration would be lethal. Around a hydrothermal vent, it becomes the entire foundation of life itself. Specialized bacteria have evolved a process called chemosynthesis, essentially a chemical stand-in for photosynthesis. Instead of harvesting energy from sunlight, these bacteria harvest energy directly from that hydrogen sulfide, using it to build sugars and nutrients the exact same basic way a plant would use captured sunlight. These bacteria sit at the very base of an entirely separate food chain, one running on pure chemistry with no sunlight required anywhere in the process. Giant tube worms did not just stumble into the system by accident. They evolved an entire specialized organ, that internal trophosome introduced back in the previous chapter, purely to host these bacteria and keep the whole partnership running smoothly. But tube worms are far from the only species cashing in on this chemical buffet. Vent crabs, vent shrimp, and various other specialized creatures cluster tightly around these same openings, all building their own survival strategies around the exact same underlying chemistry. Picture discovering an entirely separate power grid running underneath a city, one nobody realized existed, quietly supplying electricity to buildings using a completely different fuel source than anything visible above ground. That is essentially what scientists found when hydrothermal vents were first properly studied back in the late 1970s. An entire previously unknown branch of life on Earth, thriving without a single connection to the sun. This discovery forced biologists to seriously reconsider one of their most fundamental assumptions about life itself. Sunlight, it turns out, is not strictly required to build a thriving, complex ecosystem. Given the right chemistry and the right conditions, life finds an entirely separate path forward, one that could theoretically play out on other worlds entirely, on moons with subsurface oceans, sealed away from any star's light, running on chemical vents of their own. Giant tube worms, remember, do none of the actual chemical conversion themselves. Every bit of their food production runs through their bacterial partners instead. That single fact sets up one of the more genuinely strange relationships in all of biology, a full-scale partnership between a 7-foot animal and microbes too small for the human eye to ever see. The next chapter goes even deeper into exactly how that specific partnership works, and why it may be one of the most efficient survival deals evolution has ever produced. Somewhere inside a 7-foot-long tube worm sits an organ unlike almost anything else in the animal kingdom. Scientists call it the trophosome, and it may be the single most important part of this creature's entire body, despite the fact that the worm cannot survive one single day without help from something living inside it. The trophosome works essentially like an internal reactor, densely packed with billions of specialized bacteria. These are not parasites, sneaking in uninvited and stealing resources from an unwilling host. This is a genuine, mutually beneficial partnership, a relationship scientists refer to as symbiosis, where both species depend completely on each other just to survive. Here's how the full deal actually works. The worm's feathery red plume, extending outward into open water near the vent, absorbs hydrogen sulfide along with oxygen and carbon dioxide pulled directly from the surrounding seawater. Specialized red blood cells inside the worm, similar in basic function to human blood cells, bind onto these chemicals and transport them straight down through the worm's body to the trophosome. Once they arrive, the resident bacteria get to work, using that raw hydrogen sulfide as fuel to build sugars and essential nutrients through chemosynthesis, the same basic process explored in the previous chapter. Picture running a factory where you personally handle zero manufacturing yourself. Your only job is hauling in raw materials, then handing every single one of them off to your factory workers to actually build the product. That is essentially the tube worm's role in this entire partnership. It gathers, filters, and delivers ingredients. It leaves the actual work of food production completely up to its bacteria. In exchange for doing all that labor, the bacteria receive something they could never build entirely on their own: a safe, protected, endlessly stable home, sitting directly beside a steady and predictable chemical fuel supply. Outside the worm's body, hydrogen sulfide levels near a vent fluctuate constantly and unpredictably. Inside the worm, the bacteria get reliable delivery on a controlled schedule, arranged specifically for their benefit by their host. This partnership helps explain the tube worm's genuinely explosive growth rate, because the worm never wastes any energy on hunting, chewing, or digesting food the traditional way. Essentially, all of the energy its bacteria produce can be funneled directly into new tissue growth instead. That single efficiency shortcut is a major part of why these worms can add multiple feet of length within just their first couple years of life, a growth rate matched by a very few other invertebrates found anywhere in the ocean. There's something worth sitting with here. Two entirely separate species, one large enough to see with the naked eye, one far too small to ever notice without a microscope, have fused their survival together so completely that neither one could last more than a matter of hours without the other. Neither species is fully complete on its own anymore. Together they form something closer to a single, combined organism, built specifically to survive in one of the most violently hostile environments anywhere on the planet. Not every tube worm species runs on the exact same timeline, though. Some grow explosively fast, exactly like the ones explored in these past two chapters. Others, living in a related but distinctly different environment, take the complete opposite approach, growing at a pace so slow it borders on genuinely difficult to believe. Two tube worm relatives, similar enough in basic body plan to be mistaken for the same species at a casual glance, live out two almost completely opposite survival strategies. One sprints through its entire life, the other spends centuries getting there. Both approaches somehow work, and comparing them reveals just how many different paths evolution can carve toward the exact same basic goal: survival. The first worm, the fast grower already explored across the last several chapters, lives around hydrothermal vents. Its environment delivers energy in genuine abundance, a non-stop chemical buffet blasting continuously out of the earth. With that much fuel constantly available, this worm can afford to grow explosively fast, adding feet of length within its first couple years, then living out a comparatively short life, often only around 2 years total, before its cycle winds down completely. The second worm lives at what scientists call cold seeps, areas where methane and other chemicals leak out from the seafloor at a slow, gentle pace rather than the violent blast of a true hydrothermal vent. Fuel here trickles out gradually, nothing like the abundant rush found at a vent. This worm has adapted by taking the complete opposite approach to survival. It grows slowly, patiently, and it can live for an estimated 250 years or longer. Picture two very different investment strategies playing out side by side. One approach spends everything immediately, chasing fast, high returns while resources happen to be flowing freely. The other approach saves patiently over a long stretch of time, banking on slow, dependable growth instead of any single, dramatic payoff. Neither strategy is objectively better than the other. Each one is simply built to match the specific resources actually available in its own particular environment. This comparison lines up perfectly with everything already explored several chapters back. Bergman's rule explained how a stretched out lifespan buys an animal more total time to grow larger. The cold seep tube worm demonstrates that the same exact principle taken to a genuinely extreme conclusion. A quarter of a millennium of steady, patient growth made possible almost entirely by an environment that simply never rushes. There's something worth pausing on here. A worm alive on the ocean floor right now, quietly growing at its own slow, steady pace, could have already been alive back when George Washington first became President of the United States, still sitting in that exact same spot on the seafloor, still growing, still patiently waiting. Both of these tube worm strategies, the explosive sprint and the centuries-long crawl, show just how flexible survival can become once an animal escapes the size limits that gravity and fast metabolism impose everywhere else on the planet. From here, this story moves away from bacteria-powered giants completely and towards something built entirely differently. A hunter, not a scavenger, patrolling the open water above the seafloor instead of clinging to a single fixed vent. A shark old enough to remember centuries most humans will only ever read about in a history textbook. Somewhere in the freezing black water of the Arctic Ocean, a shark is swimming right now that was already alive centuries before the United States existed as a country. This is the Greenland shark, and it holds a record that sounds almost too strange to be real. The longest known lifespan of any vertebrate animal on the entire planet. In 2016, researchers used a groundbreaking dating technique, examining proteins inside the shark's eyelids, to estimate the age of several Greenland sharks. Their results stunned the scientific community. The oldest shark tested was estimated to be somewhere between 272 and 512 years old, with the best estimate landing around 390 years. That means this individual shark was very likely already alive during the reign of Shakespeare, swimming through the same freezing water centuries before anyone had ever heard the words United States of America. Size matches that staggering age. Greenland sharks can stretch up to 24 feet long, roughly the length of a school bus, making them one of the largest shark species found anywhere in the world's oceans, rivaling even the great white in overall size. Everything about this shark's biology runs in extreme slow motion, and every single piece connects directly back to ideas already explored earlier in this story. Greenland sharks live in water that hovers just above freezing, and they grow at an almost unbelievably slow pace, adding less than half an inch of length in an entire year. Picture a sequoia tree, one of the slowest growing living things on Earth, and you start to get a real sense of just how patient this shark's entire existence actually is. At that growth rate, scientists believe it takes a Greenland shark somewhere around 150 years just to reach full sexual maturity, longer than most humans' entire lifetimes combined, just to become a fully grown adult. This connects directly back to the Bergmann's rule and Kleber's law, the two theories explored several chapters earlier. Freezing water slows this shark's metabolism down to a genuine crawl. That dramatically slowed metabolism, in turn, stretches its total lifespan out across multiple centuries, handing it far more total time to keep adding size than virtually any other vertebrate on the planet ever gets. A slow metabolism also means the shark needs comparatively little food to survive, letting it thrive even in the sparse, resource-poor waters of the deep Arctic. There is a specific detail about this shark that turns genuinely unsettling once you actually picture it. Many Greenland sharks carry a small parasitic copepod attached directly to one or both of their eyes, gradually damaging the shark's vision over time. Some researchers believe a significant number of wild Greenland sharks may be partially or almost completely blind by full adulthood. Picture navigating the freezing black depth of the Arctic Ocean for over a century, hunting prey, avoiding danger, surviving day after day, with damaged eyesight the entire time. This shark does not just survive that hardship, it thrives inside it, using other senses to navigate a world it may barely be able to see at all. A creature like this raises a genuinely strange question about the passage of time itself. A shark swimming through Arctic water right now may have been alive before the telephone existed, before electricity lit a single home, before photography ever captured a single human face. Its heart, though, does not beat anything like a human heart does, and that single detail turns out to be one of the most extreme adaptations found anywhere in this entire story. A resting human heart beats somewhere around 60 to 100 times every single minute. Sit still for 1 full minute and count your own pulse, and you will land somewhere in that range without much effort. Now picture a heart so slow that a single beat can stretch out across 10 full seconds, sometimes longer. That is the reality for the Greenland shark, and it may hold the key to understanding centuries of survival packed into a single animal. Scientists studying Greenland sharks in the wild have recorded resting heart rates dramatically slower than almost any other vertebrate on the planet, some individuals showing barely a handful of beats per minute in the coldest water. Picture a clock ticking so slowly that each individual second seems to stretch out and drag. That is roughly the pace this shark's entire circulatory system runs on, every single day of its multi-century life. This extreme slowdown connects directly back to Kleber's law, the efficiency rule explored several chapters ago. A slower heart means less total blood movement, which means a dramatically reduced overall energy demand across the shark's entire body. Combine that with its already massive size, and you get an animal running on what amounts to bare minimum fuel, even while patrolling some of the coldest, most food-scarce water found anywhere on Earth. Diet reflects the same extreme patience. Greenland sharks are not fast, aggressive hunters chasing down prey through open water. Stomach content studies have turned up an unusually wide range of items, including fish, seals, and even remains from other, much larger marine mammals, suggesting this shark may scavenge just as often as it actively hunts. Picture a creature moving so slowly and so quietly through the water that some scientists have nicknamed it the sleeper shark, patient enough to simply drift toward opportunity rather than chase it down directly. Even swimming speed reflects this same extreme conservation strategy. Recorded Greenland sharks typically cruise at less than 1 mile per hour, a pace slower than the average human simply strolling down a sidewalk. And yet, this same unhurried shark has been recorded hunting seals, animals easily capable of outswimming it in any straightforward, fair chase. Researchers believe it may rely on stealth and patience instead of speed, closing in slowly enough that sleeping or unaware prey never even notices the danger until it is already far too late. There's something worth sitting with in this comparison. Every single piece of this shark's biology, its heartbeat, its swimming speed, its multi-century lifespan, all points toward the exact same underlying strategy. Survive by using as little energy as physically possible, stretch it out across as much total time as physically possible. It is patience elevated into a genuine evolutionary superpower. One single animal quietly outlasting entire human generations without ever needing to rush a single step. This same theme of patience now carries the story from one of the ocean's slowest giants directly into one of its most explosive hunters, an animal built not for centuries of drifting stillness, but for split-second, high-speed pursuit through total darkness. The giant squid does not survive by waiting. It survives by seeing what nothing else in that darkness can. Nearly 1,000 feet below the surface, in water completely stripped of sunlight, an eye the size of a dinner plate slowly scans the darkness. It belongs to the giant squid, an animal that can stretch up to 43 feet long, roughly the length of a school bus, and it possesses the largest eyes of almost any animal alive on Earth today. Each giant squid eye can measure up to 10 inches across, roughly comparable in size to a standard soccer ball. Compare that to a human eye, barely over an inch wide, and the difference becomes almost impossible to picture without seeing it directly. Why would any animal need eyes that dramatically, disproportionately large? The answer comes down to a single, unforgiving fact about life in the deep ocean. There is almost no light down there at all, and every last available photon counts. Picture standing inside a completely sealed room with the lights turned off, the door shut, and not one single crack letting any light leak in from outside. That is close to the total darkness found at the depths where giant squid hunt. In that kind of environment, even the faintest possible flicker of light, whether the last dying trace of sunlight filtering impossibly far down from the surface, or the brief telltale glow of a bioluminescent predator drifting past, can mean the difference between spotting danger in time or becoming a meal without any warning at all. Larger eyes capture more available light, plain and simple. The exact same basic principle behind why a wide camera lens performs so much better than a narrow one in dim conditions. Scientists studying giant squid eye anatomy believe this dramatic size increase evolved specifically to detect the movement of large, deep-diving predators approaching from a distance, most notably sperm whales, giving the squid crucial extra seconds to react before an attack actually arrives. This need for enhanced vision connects directly back to buoyancy, the same principle explored several chapters back with the Japanese spider crab. On land, an eye that size would be an impossible structural burden, dragging painfully on every surrounding muscle and bone. In water, buoyancy supports that weight effortlessly, letting evolution build sensory organs at a scale that land could never realistically support. Hunting itself unfolds with startling, sudden speed, a sharp contrast against the patient, unhurried Greenland shark from the previous 2 chapters. Giant squid possess 2 specialized feeding tentacles lined with rows of sharp, serrated suckers, capable of shooting outward and snatching prey in a fraction of a second. Picture a bullwhip cracking forward with startling precision, then instantly hauling its target directly back toward a sharp, waiting beak. That single explosive strike may be the giant squid's only real opportunity at a meal for days at a time, and in the total darkness of the deep ocean, those oversized eyes are exactly what make that critical strike possible in the first place. For nearly 100 years, this entire hunting process existed only in second-hand pieces, reconstructed from carcasses and stomach contents, rather than direct observation. No scientist had ever filmed a live giant squid actually hunting in its own natural habitat. That single missing piece of the puzzle sets up one of the most dramatic mysteries in this entire story. What exactly is powerful enough to successfully hunt and kill an animal built on this staggering scale? An animal stretching over 30 feet long, armed with razor sharp suckers and a beak capable of slicing through flesh. Sounds like it should sit safely at the very top of its own food chain. In the deep ocean, though, even a giant squid has a natural predator, and that predator hunts using a genuinely remarkable weapon of its own: raw sound. The sperm whale stands as the giant squid's primary natural predator, and the battles rank among the most dramatic, least witnessed contests found anywhere on the planet. Adult sperm whales can dive to depths beyond 3,000 feet, holding their breath for well over an hour at a stretch, specifically hunting giant squid and other deep sea creatures in total darkness far below where any sunlight could ever reach. Sperm whales cannot rely on sight to hunt at those crushing depths, since virtually no usable light survives that far down. Instead, they use echolocation, emitting powerful clicking sounds and then listening closely for the echo that bounces back off any solid object nearby. Picture a submarine sonar system, except built entirely out of living biological tissue, allowing the whale to essentially construct a detailed sound-based map of its pitch-black surroundings using nothing but echoes. Evidence of these deep, violent battles frequently rises straight back to the surface. Sperm whales have regularly been found carrying deep circular scars across their skin, wounds matching the exact size and shape of a giant squid's sucker rings. Physical proof of close combat fought thousands of feet beneath the waves. Some of these documented scars measure several inches across, offering researchers a rough size estimate for squid that were never directly observed, recovered, or filmed by any human being. This predator relationship helps explain the giant squid's oversized eyes. Detecting an approaching sperm whale early, even by the faintest disturbance in the surrounding water or the barest flicker of movement, could mean the difference between successfully escaping and becoming a meal. Picture a soldier on watch duty at night, straining every sense imaginable to detect danger, moving through total darkness before that danger ever manages to get close enough to strike first. The squid's massive eyes function as exactly that kind of early warning system, built specifically to buy a few precious extra seconds when every single second counts. Despite decades of dedicated searching by dozens of research teams, no scientist had ever successfully filmed a live giant squid in its own natural deep sea habitat until relatively recently. Nearly everything researchers understood about this predator relationship came entirely from indirect evidence: whale scars, squid remains recovered from whale stomachs, and the occasional dead or dying specimen that drifted to the surface on its own. An animal this genuinely massive, hunted by one of the largest predators on the entire planet, still somehow managed to remain almost completely hidden from direct human observation for well over a century. If a 30-foot squid can vanish that completely from scientific view for that long, an obvious question follows close behind. What happens once you go looking for an even larger, even more elusive relative, one long rumored to dwarf the giant squid in raw size and mass? The answer waits in the frigid waters of the Southern Ocean, home to a creature so rarely seen that its very first confirmed video footage did not arrive until shockingly recently. Deep in the frigid Southern Ocean surrounding Antarctica lives a creature even more massive, pound for pound, than the giant squid. This is the colossal squid, and while it does not quite match the giant squid's maximum recorded length, it comfortably wins on total mass, reaching an estimated weight of nearly half a metric ton, roughly comparable to a small car. The colossal squid can stretch up to 33 feet long, slightly shorter than its giant squid cousin, but its body carries dramatically more bulk and muscle throughout. Picture two athletes standing side by side, one built tall and lean, the other shorter but visibly more powerful through the shoulders and chest. That basic comparison captures the real difference between these two squid species fairly well. The giant squid wins on pure length, the colossal squid wins on raw mass and strength. One specific anatomical feature sets the colossal squid apart from virtually every other squid species on Earth: rotating hooks. While the giant squid relies entirely on rows of sharp-edged suckers lining its tentacles, the colossal squid's tentacle clubs carry sharp, swiveling hooks instead, some of them capable of rotating a full 360 degrees. Picture the difference between gripping something firmly with a suction cup versus grabbing it with a fully rotating fish hook. The colossal squid's hooks can grip, twist, and tear in ways a simple sucker never could, making it a genuinely formidable predator once prey comes within striking range. The squid's eyes carry their own record entirely separate from the giant squid's. The colossal squid's eyes may reach up to 11 inches across, the largest eyes recorded for any animal currently known to science. For nearly 100 years following its initial scientific description, almost everything researchers understood about the colossal squid came entirely from dead specimens, animals recovered from the stomachs of sperm whales or occasionally hauled up by accident inside a commercial fishing net. Picture trying to understand exactly how a lion behaves in the wild using nothing but photographs of lions that had already died. That was essentially the situation surrounding the colossal squid for almost an entire century of scientific study, a complete absence of any real behavioral data. That situation would not remain unchanged forever. In a moment that stunned marine biologists across the globe, researchers finally managed to capture something no human being had ever successfully witnessed before. Genuine, confirmed video footage of a living colossal squid swimming freely through its own natural deep-sea habitat. For nearly 100 years, the colossal squid existed as something closer to a scientific ghost. Researchers knew it was real. They had recovered actual physical specimens, examined its distinctive hooks, and measured its massive eyes in careful scientific detail. Nobody, though, had ever actually seen one alive, swimming freely through its own natural deep-sea habitat, until an expedition finally changed that. The moment arrived through the Schmidt Ocean Institute, working in the frigid waters near the South Sandwich Islands, not far from Antarctica. Using a remotely operated vehicle capable of withstanding crushing deep sea pressure, researchers captured the first confirmed video footage in history of a live colossal squid swimming naturally through the deep. A juvenile individual, translucent and genuinely alien in appearance, drifted directly into camera view, and scientists on board erupted immediately, recognizing on the spot exactly what they were witnessing unfold in real time. Picture searching for a single specific person somewhere across an entire planet, using nothing but old photographs and secondhand rumors for 100 consecutive years. Then imagine that exact same person suddenly walking calmly into full view, completely unannounced, directly in front of your own camera. That is roughly the scale of surprise and disbelief this discovery triggered throughout the marine biology community. Dr. Kat Bolstad, a squid researcher who helped verify the footage for the Schmidt Ocean Institute, noted that for the better part of a century, scientists had mainly encountered colossal squid only as prey remains recovered from whale and seabird stomachs. Direct video evidence like this had never once existed before that specific expedition. This single detail captures precisely why the moment felt so genuinely historic within the world of marine science. One particular detail from that footage stands out as especially strange. Juvenile colossal squid are almost completely transparent, their internal organs visible straight through nearly see-through flesh, like a living, breathing piece of glass drifting silently through open black water. As the squid grows older and larger, that transparency gradually fades, replaced eventually by the thicker, more opaque colorings seen in the massive adult specimens recovered over the decades from whale stomachs and fishing nets. This same expedition also captured a second, separate discovery just as remarkable in its own right: the first confirmed footage of the glacial glass or squid, a close relative of the colossal squid, filmed for the very first time only a short while earlier near Antarctica. Two entirely separate deep-sea species, each one going completely unfilmed for the entirety of recorded human history, both finally captured on camera within roughly the same short window of time. Jyotika Vemani, executive director of the Schmidt Ocean Institute, pointed out that spotting two entirely different squid species on back-to-back expeditions reveals just how little humanity has actually witnessed of the animals living throughout the Southern Ocean. That statement captures something genuinely important about this entire story. If an animal this massive, this strange, and this widely documented through indirect evidence alone could still remain completely unfilmed for 100 straight years, what else might currently be swimming through the deep ocean, still waiting for its own very first moment in front of a camera? Return to that colossal squid eye for a moment, because a single measurement barely captures just how genuinely extreme this particular adaptation actually is. An eye reaching up to 11 inches across is not simply large compared to a human eye. It stands as the single largest eye ever recorded for any animal currently known to science, living or extinct. Picture holding a full-size soccer ball directly up next to your own head. Now picture that exact same soccer ball functioning as a single working eye, correctly proportioned and fully embedded within a face, many times larger than any human face could ever be. That comparison offers a genuine physical sense of scale for exactly what colossal squid carry natural inside their own skulls. Why would evolution push eye size this far, well past what even the giant squid ended up needing? Part of the answer connects directly back to the colossal squid's specific hunting environment. It lives in the frigid, pitch-black waters of the Southern Ocean, an environment offering even less available light than many other deep-sea habitats found across the rest of the planet's oceans. Less available light pushes evolution to compensate with an ever larger light-collecting surface. The exact same basic principle explored several chapters back with the giant squid's own oversized eyes. There's a second, more specific explanation as well, one directly tied to that squid's most dangerous natural predator. Sperm whales hunt colossal squid using echolocation, but they also generate detectable disturbances as they swim. Subtle shift in water pressure and faint traces of bioluminescent light stirred up by their sheer movement through the water. Researchers believe the colossal squid's exceptionally oversized eyes may be specifically built to detect an approaching sperm whale from unusually far away, buying critical extra seconds to escape before any actual attack ever arrives. Picture a smoke detector engineered to sense the very first faintest wisp of smoke, long before any actual flame becomes visible to the naked eye. That is essentially the survival function this squid's eyes are built to perform, an early warning system engineered specifically to detect danger before it ever draws close enough to strike. This single adaptation ties together nearly every theory already explored throughout this entire story so far. Buoyancy allows a structure this size to exist without collapsing under its own weight. The extreme darkness of the deep ocean creates genuine evolutionary pressure toward ever larger eyes, and the specific predator relationship with sperm whales pushes that pressure to its most extreme, most refined possible conclusion. Every piece connects directly to every other piece. The colossal squid closes out this particular chapter of deep sea giants, but the pattern connecting all of these animals together, cold water, scarce food, and crushing depth reshaping entire bodies, does not stop at squid, sharks, and armored isopods. It reaches into genuinely unexpected corners of the animal kingdom as well, including one group of animals that most people barely think about at all until they see one scaled up to a nightmarish, dinner plate-sized version of itself. In the freezing waters surrounding Antarctica, an animal crawls slowly across the seafloor, with a leg span reaching up to 14 inches across, roughly the size of a full dinner plate. In temperate waters found throughout most of North America and Europe, the same general type of creature typically grows to barely 2 or 3 millimeters wide, small enough that spotting one at all usually requires an actual magnifying glass. This is the Antarctic sea spider, and the size difference between its polar and temperate populations ranks among the most dramatic examples of gigantism found anywhere in the entire ocean. Sea spiders, known scientifically as pycnogonids, are not true spiders in the strict biological sense, though they are distant relatives, both belonging to the same broader group of joint-legged animals called arthropods. Around most of the world, they exist as tiny, barely noticeable creatures clinging quietly to rocks and coral. In the icy waters surrounding Antarctica, some individuals grow to well over 100 times the size of their temperate relatives, an increase in scale that would be roughly equivalent to a common housefly suddenly growing to the size of a full-grown eagle. This dramatic size increase connects to a phenomenon scientists call polar gigantism, a close cousin of deep sea gigantism explored throughout the earlier chapters of this story. Instead of extreme depth driving the growth, extreme cold does the heavy lifting here instead, since Antarctic waters remain close to freezing year-round regardless of how deep or shallow a specific location actually sits. Researchers studying this specific species believe freezing temperatures have slowed these spiders' metabolism down to the point where their bodies require barely any oxygen at all to keep functioning. That single detail connects directly back to the oxygen temperature hypothesis, explored several chapters back with the giant isopod. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen than warm water, and a slowed metabolism demands proportionally less oxygen overall just to keep the body running. Combine those two separate factors together, and a genuine evolutionary opening appears, one that allows a body to grow dramatically larger than it otherwise ever could. Scientists studying these spiders have discovered something that actively challenges the simplest possible version of that same hypothesis, though. Researchers tested how well various sea spiders could right themselves after being flipped upside down, across a range of different water temperatures, expecting the larger spiders to struggle noticeably more due to their higher overall oxygen demands. Some of that testing failed to turn up the clear, size-based difference in performance that the simplest version of the oxygen temperature hypothesis would predict. This is precisely why deep sea and polar gigantism remain such genuinely active areas of ongoing scientific research. The full explanation is clearly more complicated than any single, tidy theory can fully capture on its own. There is something almost unsettling about the very physical appearance of these particular animals, setting them apart even among all the other deep sea giants explored throughout this story so far. Most of a sea spider's essential internal organs, including major parts of both its digestive and reproductive systems, do not sit compactly inside its central body the way virtually every other animal on Earth organizes itself. In sea spiders, those organs stretch directly out into the legs themselves. That single strange detail sets up the next stop in this journey perfectly. Most animals keep their essential organs neatly contained within one central, well-protected body cavity. Human intestines coil safely inside the abdomen. An insect's digestive tract runs cleanly along its central torso, tucked well away from its far more vulnerable legs. Sea spiders break this basic pattern entirely, and the specific way they break it may be a genuine part of what allows them to grow so dramatically oversized in the first place. In an Antarctic sea spider, portions of the digestive system extend directly out into the legs themselves, rather than staying contained within a small central body the way most other animals organize their internal anatomy. Portions of the reproductive system frequently follow that exact same unusual pattern. Picture a building where the plumbing and electrical systems do not stay contained neatly within the walls, but instead run visibly out along the support beam stretching toward every single corner of the structure. That is roughly the sea spider's actual body plan. Organs distributed directly through its limbs rather than clustered safely in one central hub. Why would any animal evolve a layout this unusual? Part of the explanation likely traces back to the sea spider's proportions. Its central body is genuinely tiny compared to its dramatically long, spindly legs, leaving very little internal space available for organs to comfortably fit inside that central section alone. Extending organs directly out into the legs solves that specific spatial problem quite elegantly, making full and efficient use of every available inch across the entire body. There's a second explanation as well, one tied directly back to oxygen. Sea spiders do not have lungs or gills in any traditional sense at all. Instead, oxygen appears to diffuse directly through the exoskeleton, entering the body passively across its entire outer surface, rather than through any specialized breathing organ. A body design that spreads internal tissue out across long, thin legs actually increases the total available surface area for that exact kind of passive oxygen absorption to take place. Picture the difference between a small, dense, compact block of ice and that exact same amount of ice stretched thin into a long, wide sheet. The thin sheet melts dramatically faster, precisely because it exposes so much more total surface area to the surrounding warm air. Sea spider legs work on that same basic surface area principle, just applied specifically toward efficient oxygen absorption instead. This connects the sea spider directly back to the oxygen temperature hypothesis explored just one chapter earlier. A larger, more oxygen-hungry body genuinely needs a correspondingly larger total surface area just to absorb enough oxygen passively to survive. Stretching organs and tissue directly out along unusually long legs may be one specific, evolutionary solution to that exact underlying oxygen problem, allowing these spiders to grow to sizes that a more compact traditional body plan could likely never fully support. Sea spiders raise one final, genuinely important question that reaches beyond biology and well into pure ecology. If extreme isolation, in this specific case, Antarctica's genuine remoteness from the rest of the world's oceans, plays any meaningful role in driving this kind of dramatic size increase, then isolation itself might function as its own distinct evolutionary force. That exact idea carries its own dedicated scientific name, one originally built to explain island-dwelling animals living on dry land, thousands of miles away from any ocean at all. Long before scientists ever began studying deep-sea gigantism in any real detail, biologists had already noticed a strange and remarkably consistent pattern playing out on isolated islands scattered across the entire globe. Small animals stranded on islands, cut off from the mainland for generation after generation, frequently evolved into noticeably larger versions of themselves over time. Large animals, following that exact same pattern in reverse, often evolved into smaller versions instead. Scientists eventually named this pattern the island rule, and it may hold a genuinely important key to understanding gigantism found throughout the deep ocean as well. Consider a classic land-based example. Giant tortoises native to the Galapagos Islands grew to sizes far larger than any of their mainland tortoise relatives elsewhere in the world. Isolated from mainland predators and mainland competitors alike, and faced with only a fairly limited range of available food resources, these tortoises evolved along a genuinely different evolutionary path than their mainland cousins ever did. Why would isolation specifically push a species toward growing larger in the first place? Part of the explanation comes down to reduced competition and reduced predation pressure. On a mainland or in a well-connected ocean region, a species faces constant, direct competition from a wide range of other species, along with a correspondingly wide range of active predators as well. In a genuinely isolated environment, both of those pressures often drop off substantially. With fewer active predators specifically targeting them and less direct daily competition for the exact same limited food resources, some species end up genuinely free to grow larger over time without facing nearly as steep an evolutionary cost for doing so. Picture a small, quiet town completely cut off from any major highway system. Businesses there do not face the same intense, constant competitive pressure a business located in a busy major city would face every single day. Without that outside competitive pressure pushing back, that same small town business might genuinely grow and expand in ways it otherwise never could have, absent any nearby rivals actively fighting for its exact same customers. The deep ocean shares several of these exact same core conditions with a genuinely isolated island. It is remote, difficult to reach, and its resources sit spread thin and scattered across a truly massive area. Predation pressure at extreme depth tends to run noticeably lower than in busier, more crowded shallow waters, since fewer total predators can physically survive down there in the first place. Combine the island rule directly with everything explored earlier throughout this story. Cold water, scarce food, and reduced overall competition and gigantism starts to look less like one single bizarre anomaly and more like a fully predictable outcome, one that plays out again and again across genuinely isolated environments, whether those environments happen to sit on dry land or buried miles beneath the ocean's surface. This same underlying idea, extreme isolation combined with extreme cold, reaches its absolute peak specifically at Earth's own poles. There, an entire distinct category of gigantism plays out, one that does not always require the extreme crushing depth associated with deep sea gigantism at all. Sometimes cold water alone, even sitting fairly close to the surface, proves powerful enough on its own to build genuine giants. Deep sea gigantism generally requires genuinely extreme depth, the crushing pressure and total darkness found thousands of feet below the surface. Polar gigantism, on the other hand, plays out somewhat differently. It can occur in comparatively shallower Arctic and Antarctic water, proving that extreme cold alone, entirely on its own, may be powerful enough to trigger this exact same underlying biological pattern, even without any truly extreme depth involved at all. Picture the frigid waters surrounding Antarctica and the Arctic as a completely separate laboratory, one where scientists can isolate and study the specific effects of extreme cold almost entirely on its own, largely separated from the equally extreme pressure and total darkness found much deeper in the world's oceans. What researchers have consistently found in that specific setting strongly reinforces virtually everything already explored throughout the earlier chapters of this story. Sea spiders, the size of dinner plates, isopods and other crustaceans reaching genuinely impressive sizes, certain fish and various other marine creatures growing noticeably larger than their equivalent relatives living in warmer waters elsewhere. The polar regions add one final, genuinely important piece to this entire ongoing puzzle. Researchers are still actively working today to determine exactly which specific mechanism deserves the most credit for driving these observed size increases. Slowed metabolism connected to extreme cold, elevated dissolved oxygen levels found consistently in colder water, reduced overall competition tied to genuine geographic isolation. Every one of these separate factors converges together at the poles in one single environment, making it genuinely difficult for scientists to cleanly separate out and isolate which specific factor deserves the most individual credit. This is precisely why researchers openly admit they are still actively working to fully confirm polar gigantism as a completely settled, scientifically verified phenomenon, even though physical giants have been found and confirmed repeatedly throughout genuinely deep water, as well as in various other less obvious ocean environments. Picture a genuine crime with several different plausible suspects, each one offering a real and coherent partial explanation, but with no single confession or definitive piece of evidence yet capable of fully closing the entire case. That is roughly where current scientific research stands today regarding the true underlying causes of polar gigantism. What is not remotely in question, though, is that the actual pattern itself is completely real and well documented. Sea spiders the size of dinner plates are not folklore or exaggeration. Sharks stretching the length of a school bus are not folklore either. Half-ton squid, more than twice that same overall length, are swimming through the freezing Southern Ocean at this very moment. Polar regions consistently produce some of the single largest examples of their particular animal type found anywhere across the entire planet, a fact scientists have documented repeatedly across dozens of completely separate research expeditions over several decades. There is one particular deep-sea giant that has captured public imagination more powerfully than almost any other creature explored throughout this entire story, not necessarily because of its confirmed measured size, but because of the genuinely wild rumors and myths that have grown up steadily around it for well over a century. It carries a nickname tied directly to the end of the world, and the true factual story behind that specific nickname turns out to be even stranger than the myth itself. Stretching up to 36 feet long, silver-scaled, and shaped almost like an enormous flattened ribbon drifting slowly through open water, the oarfish holds the title of the longest bony fish currently known to science. Sightings of this genuinely striking animal have sparked myths for centuries, most notably its widely circulated modern nickname, the doomsday fish, tied to a persistent folk belief that oarfish only rise up toward the surface right before a major earthquake strikes. The oarfish typically lives in mesopelagic water, a middle layer of the ocean stretching from roughly 200 to a full 3,000 feet below the surface. It rarely willingly approaches the surface at all. When intact oarfish specimens do occasionally wash ashore or get spotted near the surface, sightings like that are genuinely rare enough that they tend to spread rapidly across social media and news outlets, often accompanied by exactly the kind of doomsday-style folklore that has followed this fish for generations. Here is where the real, verified science comes directly into the story. Multiple published studies specifically examining historical oarfish strandings across Japan, one of the specific regions where this earthquake myth originated and remains most persistent, have failed to find any statistically significant, reliable connection between oarfish sightings and any actual subsequent earthquake activity. Scientists studying this specific question generally agree that oarfish most likely surface primarily due to illness, injury, or simply becoming disoriented by unusually strong ocean currents, not because of any genuine ability to somehow sense tectonic activity building deep underground. Picture a black cat crossing someone's path directly before something unlucky happens to occur shortly afterward. Humans naturally connect two separate, unrelated events after the fact, especially when one of those two events happens to be genuinely rare, visually striking, and memorable. That basic instinct is very likely the true root of the oarfish's persistent doomsday reputation, not any real, scientifically demonstrated connection to actual seismic activity happening deep underground. Setting the myth completely aside, the oarfish's actual, confirmed biology remains genuinely remarkable entirely on its own merits. Its body is compressed dramatically thin from side to side, and it swims using a distinctive, undulating motion, its long dorsal fin rippling continuously along the full length of its body, like a length of ribbon caught steadily in ocean current. Reaching lengths beyond 35 feet, the oarfish stands as one of the clearest, most visually dramatic examples of gigantism found in any bony fish species currently known to science. Its elongated body plan sitting in stark, striking contrast against the far more compact and rounded shape of the giant isopod explored back at the very beginning of this story. The oarfish offers a genuinely valuable lesson that applies to virtually every single deep-sea giant explored across this entire journey. Real, scientifically confirmed biology is almost always dramatic enough entirely on its own, without any need for exaggerated myth layered clumsily on top of it. A 36-foot fish gliding silently through the deep ocean's middle layer does not actually need any doomsday backstory whatsoever to qualify as genuinely awe-inspiring. That fact raises an even bigger, more important question about deep sea gigantism as a whole. If this particular pattern truly runs as consistently and predictably throughout the deep ocean as this entire story has suggested so far, does every single deep sea species actually follow it without exception? The honest, complete answer turns out to be genuinely surprising in its own right. Every rule explored throughout this entire story so far might start to feel absolute, an ironclad law of the deep ocean applying to every single creature living down there without exception. Cold water, scarce food, and crushing pressure supposedly push bodies toward growing larger again and again across dozens of completely unrelated species. Then scientists turned their attention toward one specific, often overlooked group of animals, and the entire pattern flipped completely upside down. Myofauna are tiny organisms, generally defined as anything capable of passing directly through a mesh screen with holes roughly 1 millimeter wide, smaller than the tip of a sharpened pencil. This group includes microscopic worms, tiny crustaceans, and various other small invertebrates scattered throughout ocean sediment worldwide. According to established research, meiofauna do not follow the same size pattern as isopods, tube worms, or squid at all. Instead, they show the exact reverse trend, actually decreasing in overall size as depth increases, running in the completely opposite direction from every other deep sea giant explored throughout this entire story. Picture a single, simple rule that seems to apply consistently across an entire neighborhood. Every house built the exact same way, following the exact same blueprint. Then picture one single house sitting right in the middle of that same neighborhood, built along a completely different design altogether, following no version of that shared blueprint whatsoever. Meiofauna are essentially that one contradicting house embedded directly within the same deep ocean neighborhood as the giant isopod and the colossal squid, yet somehow following a completely separate set of rules. Why would one specific group of animals break a pattern that otherwise holds up so consistently and reliably almost everywhere else throughout the deep ocean? Scientists do not currently have one single, fully settled answer to that specific question. One reasonable possibility connects directly back to available physical space itself. Meiofauna live tucked directly within the tiny gaps and spaces found between individual grains of sediment on the ocean floor. As you travel deeper into the ocean, those sediment particles themselves often become progressively finer and more tightly packed together, potentially shrinking the total physical space available for any organism trying to live directly within those tiny gaps. This single genuine exception matters enormously for how scientists think about the entire broader topic of deep sea gigantism. It proves the pattern explored throughout this entire story is not some absolute universal law of physics, applying automatically and without exception to literally every organism living in cold, deep water. It is closer to a genuine evolutionary tendency instead, a strong pull in one particular direction that plays out repeatedly across many different unrelated species, yet one that can still be overridden entirely by other, more specific and localized pressures, like the sheer physical constraint of finding enough livable space between individual grains of packed sediment. Confirming a genuine exception like this does not happen by simple accident or casual observation alone. It requires the same kind of painstaking, deliberate scientific work responsible for every single discovery already explored throughout this entire story, going all the way back to that very first giant isopod specimen described by scientists back in 1879. The next chapter turns directly toward the actual researchers making these kinds of careful discoveries happen, and toward the genuinely serious personal risks many of them accept in the process. Every fact explored throughout this entire story, from the giant isopod's 5-year fast to the colossal squid's history-making first video, required someone to physically go and get it. Deep sea research does not happen from the safety of a comfortable office chair. It happens inside cramped submersibles, aboard research vessels pitching through rough open ocean, and through the careful, patient operation of remotely operated vehicles, lowered miles down into crushing, hostile darkness. Consider exactly what it actually takes to reach the depths explored throughout this story. A trip to observe a giant isopod might require a vehicle capable of withstanding pressure found at 2,000 feet down. Reaching a colossal squid in its own natural habitat, the way the Schmidt Ocean Institute team eventually did, means operating specialized equipment engineered to survive pressure found in some of the coldest, most genuinely remote water located anywhere on the entire planet. Every single expedition explored throughout this entire story carries real technical risk, genuine financial cost, and often represents years of dedicated planning collapsed down into just a small handful of actual working dive days. Picture attempting to explore the surface of Mars, except the mission control room sits just a few miles directly above your own head instead of millions of miles away across empty space. Deep sea researchers frequently describe their own work in almost exactly that same way. Humans have mapped a smaller overall percentage of the ocean floor in fine, precise detail than we have mapped the actual surface of the moon. Every single expedition heading down into genuinely extreme depth carries real potential for entirely new discoveries, alongside real potential for serious, sometimes catastrophic, equipment failure. Researchers like Craig McLean, a deep sea biologist who has spent years actively studying exactly this specific pattern of gigantism, represent an entire small community of scientists dedicating their careers to understanding creatures that most people will genuinely never see with their own eyes in their entire lifetime. That kind of work demands specialized technical expertise, serious sustained funding, and a genuine real willingness to spend extended stretches of time at sea, often working through challenging conditions in pursuit of data that might ultimately answer just one single small piece of one much larger overall question. There's something worth sitting with here. Every single fact explored throughout this entire story, the giant isopod's curling defense, the tube worm's internal bacterial garden, the Greenland shark's centuries long lifespan, exists specifically because someone was willing to travel to one of the most genuinely hostile environments found anywhere on this entire planet and bring real, hard won data back safely to the surface. Deep sea gigantism is not simply an interesting trivia fact passed casually from person to person. It is an active, ongoing area of real scientific research, one that keeps producing entirely new questions just as fast as it manages to answer any of the old ones. That dedicated, ongoing research now faces a genuinely serious new complication. The cold water conditions responsible for creating these giants in the very first place are beginning to change, and nobody yet knows exactly what that change might ultimately mean for the future of deep sea gigantism as a whole. Nearly every single theory explored throughout this entire story traces back to one single shared root cause: cold water. Bergman's rule depends directly on cold temperature. Kleber's law becomes a genuine survival advantage specifically because cold water demands it. The oxygen temperature hypothesis depends entirely on cold water's unique, specific ability to hold and retain more dissolved oxygen than warmer water ever can. Remove that cold water entirely from the equation, and the very foundation underneath every single giant explored throughout this story potentially begins to shift beneath their own feet. Ocean temperatures are measurably rising as a direct, well-documented result of global climate change, and that warming trend reaches down into progressively deeper water as time continues to pass. Picture slowly turning up a household thermostat, one single degree at a time, inside a house that was originally built and engineered specifically to run on cold. At some point, appliances originally designed for those colder conditions inevitably start to genuinely struggle to keep up with a fundamentally different operating environment than the one they were first built for. Scientists do not yet have one single, fully confirmed answer regarding exactly how a warming ocean might ultimately affect deep sea gigantism as a whole, but the underlying theoretical logic driving real concern is genuinely sound and consistent with everything already explored throughout this story. If cold water is a primary driver behind larger cell size, slower metabolism, and higher available dissolved oxygen levels, then warmer water logically threatens to reverse each one of those same specific factors. Smaller cells, faster, more demanding metabolism, reduced available oxygen, every underlying condition that helped build these giants in the first place, could realistically begin shifting in the opposite direction entirely. This concern extends well beyond the deep sea giants explored throughout this particular story. Polar gigantism depends directly and heavily on the Arctic and Antarctic remaining genuinely cold. Both of those polar regions currently rank among the fastest warming areas found anywhere on the entire planet. Species like the Antarctic sea spider, having spent countless generations adapting specifically to extreme, stable cold, may face genuinely serious difficulty adjusting quickly enough to rapidly shifting new conditions within their own lifetimes. There's a deeper, more unsettling question buried directly underneath this entire specific concern. Many of the animals explored throughout this story, the Greenland shark chief among them, grow and reproduce at an almost impossibly slow pace, some individuals requiring well over a century just to reach full sexual maturity in the first place. A species built around that kind of extremely slow, patient timeline may struggle badly to adapt to environmental changes that, on a genuinely planetary scale, are currently unfolding at a comparatively rapid pace. Picture asking a marathon runner, deliberately trained and specifically built for careful, measured endurance pacing across 26 miles, to suddenly and unexpectedly compete instead in a full speed 100-meter sprint. The entire skill set simply does not transfer cleanly or quickly enough to fit a fundamentally different set of demands. This uncertainty over the giant's future does not diminish anything genuinely learned throughout the rest of the story. If anything, it adds real, immediate weight and urgency to it. These are not simply strange, isolated curiosities scattered randomly throughout the deep ocean. They are living proof of exactly how far biology can genuinely stretch under one very specific set of environmental conditions, conditions that may not remain nearly as stable or as guaranteed going forward as they have already been for millions of years. Step back now and look at everything covered across this entire journey as one single, complete picture instead of 31 separate individual stops. A house cat sized pill bug, a worm with no mouth, thriving entirely on raw poison, a shark alive since before the United States existed as a nation, a squid with eyes the size of soccer balls. Every single one of these animals represents evolution actively testing the genuine outer edges of what a living body can physically become, given one very specific, very unusual set of environmental conditions. The deeper lesson embedded directly within all of this reaches well beyond marine biology alone. Size, it turns out, is not one single fixed universal law applying equally and consistently everywhere across the planet. It is a direct, evolving response to a very specific local environment. Change the surrounding temperature, change the surrounding pressure, change the availability and predictability of food, change the presence or absence of active predators nearby. Change any single one of those specific variables enough, and the entire acceptable range of possible body sizes can shift dramatically, sometimes in ways that would look completely impossible anywhere else on the planet. Picture every theory explored throughout this entire story. Bergmann's rule, Claber's law, the oxygen temperature hypothesis, food scarcity, buoyancy, and the island rule, as 6 completely separate ingredients in one single shared recipe. No single ingredient alone fully explains the entire finished result on its own. Combined carefully together, though, in exactly the right relative proportions, they consistently and reliably produce the exact same striking outcome over and over again, across dozens of completely unrelated species scattered throughout the world's deepest, coldest water. The same recipe also helps explain something that might otherwise seem genuinely contradictory at first glance. The deep ocean ranks among the single harshest, most resource-starved environments found anywhere on this entire planet, and yet it consistently produces some of Earth's single largest living animals. Harsh conditions do not automatically guarantee smaller, more stripped-down bodies by simple default. Sometimes genuinely harsh conditions instead reward the exact opposite evolutionary strategy: patience, dramatically slowed metabolism, and a body specifically built to endure the very long, uncertain stretches between each meal. There's something worth sitting with directly here, right at the very end of this long journey through the deep. Humans have historically explored a significantly smaller overall percentage of Earth's own ocean floor than we have already explored of the moon's surface, despite the ocean sitting just a few miles beneath the very same water where people swim and sail every single day. Every single animal covered throughout this entire story was discovered specifically because someone was genuinely curious enough to go looking directly for it. Countless other animals, quite possibly stranger and larger still, almost certainly remain completely undiscovered, patiently waiting somewhere in that same vast unexplored darkness. That single specific thought, an entire unexplored world sitting just a few miles directly beneath our own feet, right here on our own planet, leads naturally toward one final, genuinely bigger question. If Earth's own deep ocean can independently produce giants this extreme, purely through cold, pressure, and total isolation acting together, what might that same basic combination of forces be capable of producing somewhere else entirely, on some other world altogether? Beyond Earth, several other worlds within our own solar system hide something remarkably similar to what has been explored throughout this entire journey. Deep, dark, genuinely isolated oceans, sealed away permanently beneath thick layers of solid ice. Europa, one of Jupiter's largest moons, is currently believed to hold a genuine liquid water ocean directly beneath its frozen, icy surface. one potentially containing more total liquid water than every single ocean found on Earth combined. Enceladus, a smaller moon orbiting Saturn, shows strong, well-documented evidence of its own subsurface ocean as well, one that actively vents plumes of water vapor directly out into open space through cracks in its icy crust. Neither moon receives any meaningful direct sunlight capable of penetrating all the way down into those specific hidden oceans, sealed away permanently beneath miles of solid ice in both cases. Picture everything already explored, the giant tube worm surviving entirely without a single ray of sunlight, powered instead purely by raw chemical energy sourced directly from hydrothermal vents. Scientists studying both Europa and Enceladus believe similar hydrothermal activity may very plausibly be occurring directly on the rocky ocean floor, buried beneath each moon's icy shell. If genuine liquid water exists there, and if a comparable chemical energy source exists there as well, then the same basic chemosynthesis process that currently powers the giant tube worm here on Earth could theoretically be occurring on a completely different world entirely, one currently sitting hundreds of millions of miles away from our own planet. This does not mean actual giant squid or giant isopods are specifically swimming through the hidden ocean beneath Europa's icy crust right now. It means something considerably more foundational and important than that. It means the basic underlying conditions required to potentially support complex life, energy, liquid water, and genuine long-term environmental stability are not necessarily unique to Earth's own oceans alone. Our own deep-sea giants prove decisively that complex, genuinely thriving life does not strictly require direct sunlight in order to survive and flourish. That single, hard-won lesson carries real, direct implications reaching far beyond our own planet's boundaries. Picture standing at the very edge of Earth's own deep ocean, staring directly down into total blackness, fully aware that something genuinely enormous, and quite possibly still completely undiscovered by any human being, might be quietly drifting through that exact same darkness at this very moment. Now picture that exact same feeling, but applied instead to an entirely separate ocean altogether, one sealed away permanently beneath ice on a distant moon hundreds of millions of miles from where you currently stand. The genuine sense of scale, and the genuine sense of complete mystery, barely changes at all between those two very different scenarios. The deep-sea giants explored throughout this entire journey, the armored isopod, the ancient shark, the enormous poison-eating worm, the squid with eyes built to catch a single stray photon of light, all prove one single powerful point beyond any reasonable doubt. Life does not need comfort in order to grow. It does not need abundance, and it does not even strictly need sunlight. Given enough raw time and given the exact right specific set of conditions, life finds a way to grow far larger and far stranger than anyone might ever have reasonably guessed. Our own planet's darkest, most crushing depths already prove that beyond any real question. Whatever else might be waiting out there, hidden beneath the ice of some other world entirely, is simply the next chapter still waiting to be fully written.